presentation. Today, we're going to talk about trees, marvelous trees. I was trying to remember where I got that, where I had that in my head, and I finally had to look it up creatively, and there was in the 80s a commercial about cheese, marvelous cheese. So that's kind of where I stole it from in my head, but branching out in your landscape. I do have a guest this morning. Karen Mojica is joining us from Hernando County Mosquito Control. So Karen, if you would just like to give us a real short talk about what's the buzz in mosquito control? Always got to say it.
Yeah, we've got a lot of buzz right now. With the wet season that we have a lot of standing water throughout the county. And I just like to get on here and let all the residents know that can spread the word that we need to control those breeding mosquitoes that are going on in those standing bodies of water. So if you have any areas that are giving you a hard time, be sure to give us a call. We have some very natural products, biological products that don't harm the fish or anything else that may be in that water, won't hurt the birds that are drinking the water. So give us a call, go on our website, go on our Facebook page. You can put that work order in, or I'd be happy to do it for you. And let us know so we can come out and do treatments in that water. Our treatments usually last about 30 days if the water, it remains that long. If we continue to get a little bit more, less water, it should start to dry up a little bit. But we are here, we're a county service. There is no charge for us to come out to your property. If you already have a lot of flying adults, we can come out and do a quick spray. Our guys will be more than happy to come out, do an evaluation, see what you have going on there. We'll treat it accordingly. We do not like using a lot of chemicals, so we are not spray happy with what needs to be done. You'll notice the truck doesn't just go around anymore. It is not a scheduled maintenance. It is something that is done on a need-to-be basis. It's monitored by the state. So we need to hear from you. If we're not seeing high numbers in that area, but you're having them on your property, please let us know, because that's what lets us know that we may need to schedule that truck or do spot treatments during the day. We do want to remind you while you're out doing gardening, there was great information. Please wear your repellent. Keep your long sleeves on if possible. It's been kind of warm. But be sure to give us a call because we are here for you. We'd like to help you. There, like I said, no charge. This is everyone's safety involved. And dump and drain any garden containers, anything that's holding water that's small enough for you to dump on your own. Please dump and drain. Do that at least once a week. Bird baths, give it a quick brush. Get those eggs out of there. If you have bromeliads, make sure you're flushing those or using a granule. The dumps that are at the box stores, they carry those, or you can get them online. And keep your family safe and healthy from the mosquitoes, because as we know, they carry diseases, and we try to maintain the county from having that. And that's pretty much all my information today.
See, somebody already has a question for you. They're already calling you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Karen. And just a reminder, mosquitoes do carry some diseases. They do not carry COVID-19, but we do need to be safe from all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we can get started on our tree presentation. I am Lily Browning. I work for Hernando County Utilities. This is my email. So if you would like a PDF copy of this presentation, it is being recorded. It will be available later on Facebook and also in a day or two on Hernando County Government YouTube channel. We know a lot of people who just, I don't do Facebook, I won't do Facebook. They're open to watching YouTube. So I'll be there too at Hernando County Government YouTube. But my email is LillyB, LILLYB @hernandocounty.us. If you have any questions, if you'd like a PDF copy of this presentation, I'll be glad to send it to you. These are the 9 principles of Florida friendly landscaping, which my regulars get to see pretty much every week. We're going to cover pretty heavily today, number 1, right plant, right place, because when it comes to trees, it is sometimes a matter of life and death. You know, you can't say that about a lot of plants, but with trees, absolutely you can. Right plant, right place. And speaking of which, there's even a campaign out there called Right Tree, Right Place, getting very specific, you know, with the right plant, right place, because that number 1 principle, right plant, right place, with trees, wrong choices could be disastrous. So, I mean, sometimes it's not our fault. Sometimes trees just fail and then, you know, collide with our homes or whatever, but we can make steps to choose the right tree and put them in the right place. Did you know that there are grades of trees, just like eggs, you know, like grade A eggs or even, you know, fancy eggs? So there are grades in the nursery industry for trees. There are Florida tree standards. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to act like we're going to go in a nursery and we want to choose the best tree that we can choose from that nursery. So there are 4 grades that exist for nursery tree plants, and they include a Florida Fancy. So this is within the Florida tree standards. Other states are going to follow these same principles, but they just may have, you know, call it different names. So Florida Fancy, that's the best kind of tree that you can get. A Florida number 1, Florida number 2, and then a call. So we can imagine, you know, 4 grades exist, and price, you know, goes down from there, but also this is the best quality. Here's what a Florida Fancy tree is going to look like in a nursery. This is not a seed that dropped from a tree on the ground and just grew. We all love those kind of trees. We love trees with character. That's what we call it. But when we are thinking of landscaping, when we are thinking of having trees in this relatively small piece of earth that we own, and we also own a home and other buildings and other things we need to protect on that small piece of earth, then we need to start thinking, I can enjoy the trees with character when I take my hikes in the woods, but when it comes to my little piece of land, I need to make smart decisions about a high quality tree that is going to be as safe as possible. So Florida Fancy, that's the number 1. And like I said, this didn't probably fall from a seed. This is a clonal type tree. And that is what your nurseries will do. They find a formula that works. So they're going to keep trying to repeat that to have the best quality that they can. It has a single trunk. It has 1 central leader is another way that we say that. See that, just one trunk to rule them all. You know, 1 central leader there, 1 strong leader. The branch diameter should be smaller than 2/3 because you want to start young, and because just like kids, trees do best when you start training them as young as possible. You don't want to see any flush cuts, like if there were branches here and someone cut it off right at the trunk and actually took, you know, some bark away. Don't want that. No open injuries. The crown, full of leaves, full of foliage. And the root ball is appropriately sized. If you were at the nursery and you try to pick this up and it resisted because the roots are going into the ground, that's an issue. You know, it's been there too long the root ball is probably getting too big for the pot, then you could have, roots getting bound up with each other. And it's a good size that will hold down the plant underground, for the size of the plant. Here's the next grade down of Florida number 1. So it's still young, but it might require a little bit of pruning while it's young to help it to have some good structure. Maybe it has some very minor or even cosmetic type of defects and, injuries, but it'll outgrow it. And this one has like a double leader, but not till way, way, way up high. And we are going to get into why a 2-trunked tree could be trouble down the line. So that's a number 1. Still a good quality tree. Not as good as a Florida Fancy, but for your money, still a good quality tree. Number 2, this one should be the cheap trees, basically. You should be able to get these pretty cheaply because they, they're just not as good of standards. They're misshapen or require major corrective pruning. You can still do that pruning while this is a baby tree. We can still train our kids while they're young. It's really hard to train a teenager, isn't it? But you're going to have to have a lot of knowledge, and you're going to have to spend the time to do it. And the defects could take several years. So you're going to have to stay on top of it as it's growing to correct those defects. And here's what we call a double leader. 2 trunks, pretty low down. This could be, for this type of tree, a problem. And a lot of it depends on also the angle here. And we're going to talk about that as well. So that's a number 2. Number 3, don't even pay for this tree. Maybe if they threw it out back or something by the dumpster, you might want to try and salvage it. But the defects are not correctable. They lack vigor, doesn't look happy at all. May have poor trunk and branch structure, circling roots, open wounds, flush cuts, or a very loose root ball, like you could pull that right out of there. Now, don't discount this type of poor little tree entirely because, there's always something. Always something you can do with that type of tree there. All righty. What I want you to avoid. And now that I'm going to introduce bark inclusions to you, you see this older double-trunked tree. It could be looking for trouble at some point. What is a bark inclusion? I compare it to like a hernia almost. Now that you see this, you're going to see it in every tree that you ever drive by. Okay, you see where these double leaders are, these 2 trunks. What happens is the cells of the tree get all bunched up and compressed right here. And it's kind of hard to see in this photo, but you can see it on a real tree. It's going to be much darker. The bark is going to be much darker and it protrudes out there. That is where the cells are compressed because this leader of the tree and this leader of the tree are fighting for dominance. And, one of them is going to win out. So, and that ends up with these compressed cells, and we call that bark inclusions. Here's another thing to avoid, those codominant leaders that we referred to, 2 trunks here. You see this angle? That's a very, very, very sharp angle. And you can see here already that it looks like there's a wound. Looks like somebody tried to correct something early on, but they did it right up against the tree, which you should not do. Not to mention, you see where it's already causing like a fault line here. So what's going to happen one day, during a storm, not during a storm, at some point, all these weak cells, that trunk is just going to split right open there. this is what happens with codominant leaders. We see it in our own human organizations as well as, with a tree. So you can think of it that way. Any group, if two people want to be the one in charge, sometimes, get in trouble. Same thing happens with a tree. So here's a graphic to help you more understand it. This is a cross section, longitudinal. This is a narrow crotch here in this, between these two. I mean, obviously this is the dominant one because it's bigger, but this one's still causing trouble here. And it has a very narrow crotch, about 90 degrees or so. So the bark trapped in this crotch creates the fissure, the fault line there. Lots of opportunity for rot in there. A lot of times, Karen talks about sometimes the mosquito problem they find in people's yards is in a hole in a tree. Great place for that type of thing to start. And as I mentioned, the compressed xylem cells. Trees have xylem cells and they have phloem cells, P-H-L-O-E-M. The way I remember it is the phloem cells is what brings all the nutrients down. They flow down, and the xylem cells bring everything back up, to help bring nutrients to the tree. Well, what happens? They all get compressed in this bark inclusion area. And not only the angle, but then you have this weak area and, prime for breakage there. Now it's okay to have branches, as long as the branches are not trying to also be the main trunk of that tree. And this is a good strong angle here, like 45 to 60 degrees. See that the xylem cells get fully formed there. There's no inclusion, no kind of herniated area. Makes it much stronger because the cells are strongly bonded. So that just helps us see what we're looking for. Now you can buy the best tree from the nursery, absolutely the best tree, and still run into trouble, and it might not be the tree's fault. You could have put it in the wrong place. Maybe it needs sun, and you put it in too shady of a spot. Or, you put it in too wet of a spot or too dry. But here are the 4 main things, and these are pretty easy to fix. Mistakes that are made that cause failing in trees. Planted too deeply. That's probably number 1. Not watering enough while it's getting established. Watering too much. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. And sometimes nature does that watering too much for us, not a whole lot to do about it. Or over mulching. We think mulch is a good thing. I compare mulch to water. You need it, it's essential, but too much of it can cause problems. So let's look at this graph, just an old UF graph. It's used over and over and over a bit, but it's so good, we need to just keep using it. Here's the root ball. This is the wrong way. That's why the big X through it. Do you see where the root ball is completely buried in the ground? There is soil over that root ball. Then they put mulch on top of all of that and right up against the tree. And they left the wire. I don't think we get too many trees around here with wire, but they left the wire or the string of the root ball still stuck to the trunk. And that root ball is too deep. So here's the right way. When you get a tree, you want to find the point where the topmost root emerges from the trunk. Measure the distance from the topmost root here to the bottom of the root ball. Then dig the hole slightly shallower, not as deep, not deeper, just a little bit less deep. But you want it at least 1.5 times wider than that root ball. 2 times is even great. And this is a saying that I borrow from Jim Mall in Pasco County. Plant them high and they won't die. Plant them low and they won't grow. So here's, they kept that root ball, but look, the root ball soil is what you see after you've planted it. And so what the dirt that you have dug up, where do you put it? You put it around here, the backfield planting hole. Keep the root flare. Here is a picture of what a root flare looks like. Keep that exposed. It needs oxygen, needs to be able to collect water. You can use mulch, but not on top of the soil ball and not on top of the roots. That way, with it being a new tree, the water gets right to it. It won't even hurt if you don't put mulch down right away. Because sometimes if you put down new mulch right out of the bag or something, what's that mulch going to do? It's going to suck up, any water that happens to come along its way until it gets weathered. So it doesn't even hurt if you plant the tree not to put the mulch down right away so that the tree itself can get all of the water. But eventually you can put it down like they have it, but not on the roots and certainly not up against the tree. We're going to cover that as well. Here's the right way. Here's that graphic again, but showing you the right way. You can have the mulch, like I said, but you see the mulch is not over top of the soil that was on the root ball. The top of the root ball is 10% above the landscape soil. That might look like a lot. It might make you a little uncomfortable, but remember it's going to sink down some. But also remember Jim's mantra, plant them high and they won't die. Plant them low and they won't grow. So when you plant the tree, you want to see the root flare and you want to see that original root ball soil. This is not just for trees. This is really a rule of thumb for any plant that you're going to plant, except possibly tomatoes. Tomatoes are the only things that you can cover up half the stem and they'll be, just as happy as can be. Trees will not. Trees will not at all. And you can you see they put in some drip irrigation for this newly planted tree. In the interest of, being overly generous, and especially if you live out in the Royal Highlands like I do, or on another very dry and sandy area, go ahead and, summer's a wonderful time to plant it because nature will help you water it. But water it either through some kind of little drip system, soaker hose, don't leave that on constantly, or by hand, for 2 years while it gets established. And that's being very, very generous. After that, it should survive on natural rainfall. Don't put it on your irrigation system. Trees don't want to be on your irrigation system. They do not need near as much water as your turf does. Here's what happens if we plant it the wrong way. If we plant it too deeply, here are some examples of trees that were planted too deeply or covered up, their root flares not allowed to, be out getting some oxygen. And what happens is those roots start looking for oxygen wherever they can. So they start growing the wrong way and they start growing round and round and round trying. And obviously that's not a healthy tree. It's going to fall right over. Now, like this can be saved by taking this part off and getting all the mulch and the soil that was around it off of it. This one probably too. There are some that can be saved, but some like this that just never had a chance from the time it was in the pot. You can try, but probably won't have very good luck. This one is also very questionable whether or not it can be saved. Here's another thing that's the wrong way. Like I said, we love mulch, but this is called, we call it volcano mulching is what we call it, because it looks like a volcano. So many things can happen here that indicate it's the wrong way. For one thing, you are wasting your money, way wasting your money here. Another thing, we only recommend 2 to 3 inches of mulch, not up against the trunk. Anything that's pressed up against the trunk opens the trunk up for disease problems, insect problems, because of all the moisture that could, hang out there. Not to mention you're smothering those poor trees. This is exactly the same thing if you did not bury it. Literally bury it. If you didn't plant it too low, but then you did this, you might as well have planted it too low because it's exactly the same thing. So you're covering up that root ball, causing all sorts of problems. And it looks silly, that's another thing. But also, what this could cause is when it does rain, all this mulch can just kind of compact itself and act as an umbrella to shed the water off. So you're not really accomplishing anything there. Take most of that away and have just the 2 to 3 inches, and then have it 6 to 8 inches, well, away from the trunk when you can no longer, tell the soil root ball. But look back here, look at all these trees and stuff. So we're going to blame the people up north for this situation. But I've seen it happen here all the time as well. Now, if you're new here, or maybe even if you're old here, sometimes I find there's 2 groups of people sometimes with misinformation. Some of them new here and some of them born here. It's kind of interesting. Because, just of wives' tales and things that they hear coming up. So I'm here to tell you none of these 3 things are an issue, are a problem with your trees. They will not harm your trees. The first one here is ball moss. It looks like it has you think, oh, it's getting into the tree. No, it's just attaching to the tree. The same with Spanish moss. Spanish moss has been here long before any of us, long before any of the buildings, long before anything. Okay, yeah, a lot of it can grow. And sometimes it may shade out a tree. So, you can just mechanically remove some of it if you want to. But generally what happens is the Spanish moss and the ball moss, they are not parasites at all. They are epiphytes. They are air plants. They're in the pineapple family. And something I recently learned about Spanish moss is zebra longwing butterflies sleep in it. Isn't that pretty cool? But what will happen is there'll be a tree that's declining due to age, due to whatever circumstances is causing the tree to decline. As the tree declines, there's more sun for the Spanish moss to photosynthesize. So it grows more on that particular structure. So it gets framed for a crime it didn't commit. Spanish moss is not hurting your trees. Like I said, if you feel that it's shading it out, then just mechanically remove some of it. Now, a lot of times the extension office people will bring in branches with this on it, and they think it's, it does look like some kind of mold that could be causing a terrible problem. It's on crepe myrtles a lot, hollies, things like that. This is called lichen, and it is the only thing like it in the whole universe. It is a combination of an algae, a fungus, and a yeast, actually. They've recently found out there's a good amount of yeast in there. There's pink lichen, there's this greenish lichen, there's white lichen. It's not hurting your trees, just using it as a structure. And actually the pink lichen, if you happen to see that, it will only grow where there's good air quality. So that's good news for you there. But neither of these are hurting your trees. So let's talk about just a few trees. There's a whole lot of other trees that you can choose from, but in the interest of time, I'm going to, show you a few of them that would make pretty good landscape trees. This East Palaca holly is a nice one. It's what I call native-ish, which native purists, probably cringe. They don't like me saying native-ish. It is a hybrid of a Florida native. It produces these nice berries, as you can see from this street scene, makes an attractive, not overly big tree. It will attract wildlife. The leaves are different than any other holly that you will run across. They are smooth and soft, not pointy at all, not, not stiff. So it's just a different type of leaf. Looks almost kind of, like a little oak tree, except it produces these beautiful berries for you. So it's a great tree to try and find. Great myrtle, I know you see them everywhere. And recently I've been talking about them because I took a trip to the east coast of Virginia, and every time I turned around, I mean, they've kind of overdone the crepe myrtle population in their area. That's what I'm going to say. And I have nothing against crepe myrtles, but anytime you try and create a monoculture, if they end up with a crepe myrtle disease, their municipalities are going to have a lot of expenses with all the dead trees. So I don't have anything against crepe myrtles, but diversity is always is the key to a healthy ecosystem. This is not a native. The other thing I was kind of concerned with all of the crepe myrtles, I like them as specimen trees, but if you're filling up your whole town with crepe myrtles, they don't attract a lot of wildlife. You could have chosen, a more native myrtle or something along those lines, and even oak trees and all of that, which are going to attract 400 or 500 different types of, insects and moths and butterflies and critters and things like that. But crepe myrtles are pretty for sure, and nice to have around. There's so many different kind of varieties. The thing with the crepe myrtle, though, we want to show you is friends don't let friends do this. Let's go back to that right plant, right place. The older crepe myrtles, the white ones, they're called Natchez. Everything in their DNA wants them to be 40 feet tall. So if you have them in a place where you don't want them to be 40 feet tall, then you're always trying to over prune them. And that actually does shorten their lives. It looks like they'll come back, just fine, but you are restricting that cell growth within the plant. You are actually going to have less flowers. Jim Davis, who's the extension director here in Hernando County, he did an experiment with 3 of his crepe myrtles. One of them, he pruned severely like this. We call it hat racking. You can see, it looks like you can hang your hat on it. The other one he pruned correctly, which we have videos how to do that if you look on Hernando County government YouTube. The other one he didn't prune at all. He did nothing to it. The crepe myrtle that produced the most amount of flowers and looked the healthiest was that middle one, the one he did a little bit of inside corrective pruning. He pruned out all the twiggy branches and removed any crossing branches, things like that. That's the one that looked the best and that bloomed the most. Pretty interesting. And yes, I have heard and I have noted myself that this year wasn't a great blooming year for crepe myrtles. I don't really know why. I'm going to suspect that our rainless May probably had something to do with the fact that we don't have a whole lot of crepe myrtle blooms this year. Here's a nice little tree, and yeah, it has like these codominant leaders, but it's gonna almost more of a shrub than a tree. And this is a native Chickasaw Plum. kind of an underused native. It needs to start being more used. So here they're using it in a cityscape, which is a good idea. Probably when you're driving around and you think you're seeing dogwoods in spring in the woods, you're actually seeing these Chickasaw plums. Dogwoods are not doing that well in Central Florida anymore. I know they used to, but there's a couple of things. Dogwoods all over the country experienced a disease issue with anthracnose disease. But there's another issue with dogwoods in Central Florida. It's just getting too hot. They're not doing as well because it's just a few degrees warmer here than it was maybe 20 years ago. So they're not as happy here anymore. But these Chickasaw plums are still doing pretty well. And in the spring, it'll be full of these pretty white flowers all over it. And hopefully this gentleman won't look as bored then. So, and it's going to make a nice small specimen tree in your yard. Nothing says the South like a Southern magnolia. But the regular Southern magnolia, original, gorgeous as they are, they're too big for most landscapes. You can say, yeah, oh my gosh, there's most beautiful flowers up there. Do I need my binoculars to see them? Not to mention, when I go back to those natives, you mentioned that magnolia to a native, they're just going to almost glare at you because, why? Because they had to clean them up. They had to mow around those cones. They had to rake up the leaves. So if you have a lot of space and you're not that worried about cleanup, then certainly consider the Southern magnolia. But wait, there are other choices in the magnolia world. This is a cross. This saucer magnolia is a cultivar. And sometimes people call it a tulip poplar, but it's not a tulip poplar. It's much smaller than a tulip poplar, or sometimes they call it a tulip tree because of the look of the flowers. And there's many different cultivars of this saucer magnolia, all with all these ladies' names, like roses, pretty much. So each one, the flower may be a little more white, or it could be a little more pinkish, or even get into the purple, hues. So it's a nice little tree to have around, but it seems to be pretty picky. It says it's like 7A to 9A, and we are 9A in Hernando County. But remember, I mentioned those dogwoods aren't as happy here anymore. So if I could foresee the future, I might think these saucer magnolias might have a problem, in the future, adapting to it getting warmer here. So, but there's another beautiful magnolia that can enter your world. There's a story here. The story behind this little gem magnolia. This is much more closely related to that original Southern magnolia cultivar of it, but it is, a size with which we can live with. It's only going to get 30 to 35 feet tall, but its flowers are going to look very similar to the one on the, the older Southern magnolias. And even the brown underside of the leaves, makes you think of a Southern magnolia. So you're going to have it, more appropriately sized to your landscape and get to see those flowers. So this, is a pretty good pick. And why I have this picture and the story, behind this, it just happened recently. A coworker and I went to a nursery to find this. We have another coworker who lost a loved one. So, the group of us decided it would be nice to give him a memorial tree. So then they came to me, this is what his property is like. It's on the river. So it's wet and, it has some sunny spots, but, kind of shady. So I said, well, of course, the best kind of tree for what you're describing is, of course, a cypress tree. But, we know the property has a lot of that already naturally. And something that, that's a memorial tree most people want to see it bloom, you know, and think of their loved ones. So I suggested a magnolia, and then, you know, we talked about it, and we, you know, settled on this little gem magnolia. And then the other coworker found a local nursery that did have them available. So I was chosen to go out, and everything I showed you in the beginning, you know, how to choose a tree was running through my mind. And so this is sometimes where what we're taught and reality comes in. And sometimes it's not all that easy. You know, it's not cut and dry to find exactly what I told you when you're here with reality. So you can see, now there were some trees, the coworker can attest to, I was just walking by going, nope, 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 nope. And partly what I was looking at is the pots were full of weeds. So that just made me think, well, this hasn't even been cared for in quite a while. This pot had no weeds. We've got a bag around it now, but it didn't have any weeds. The flare was visible, wasn't buried too deeply in that pot. It wasn't outgrowing the pot. A few of them, like we tried to pick up, and they were stuck to the ground. That could have been the weed roots, but still didn't make me feel good about that. I could not find a single one of these that had a perfectly straight trunk. This has this tiny little bend in it, and but it was less than some of the others bends. So, but in general, there's not another like trunk of the same size trying to look like it wants to be a co-leader. There's all these smaller branches, and you can't see from this picture, but you know, it has the 45 crotch angles, and overall it had a good crown. And I think this is going to be, you know, a pretty good looking tree. So here's a little bit of where, you know, academia meets reality. So I think we'll be okay with this one. And I think it's going to be a great tree on his property, you know, to think about his loved one. Here's another red cedar, very easy to grow around here. They will get huge. Gonna let you know that now. I got from the book 40 to 50. I added the plus. Where I have them in the Royal Highlands, they're humongous. So you need a lot of space for them. They do attract a lot of wildlife. There's the different types of southern red cedar. There's different types of cedars out there. They're great for screening. Like I said, though, you do need a lot of space, and you don't really want the cedar tree where you want to have a lot of turf. Cedar trees have allelopathic chemicals. What did I just say? Allelopathic chemicals, what they do is, it's almost like its own built-in herbicide. Allelopathic means I don't want anything growing around me that's not a cedar tree. Other plants do that as well. I think lantana does that. So it might have some difficulties. This looks like it's going pretty good in the grass, but over time, you know, you might have some difficulty with that, not to mention where the shade is. What I like about red cedar is if we have a particularly cold winter, and where I live in the Royal Highlands, things get pretty golden looking in the winter, all tan, all straw colored, all dried out, except for those red cedars. Sometimes they're the only green thing out there to see. Wax myrtle. This is such a nice little native that attracts a lot of birds and, you know, moths and other caterpillars, things like that. It's not really going to be there for the bloom. It has little tiny white flowers, but it makes a great little, if you have a ligustrum that needs to be replaced, I would suggest replacing it, you know, with this wax myrtle instead, so that you have a nice native in your yard, nice native shrub, and just a nice foundation plant. Okay, live oak. That picture at the beginning, if you remember it in my in the cover slide was a humongous crepe myrtle. I took that picture out in a field. And what it was doing was dipping down its branches to the ground. It'll do that when it's really old and it knows it's on its way out. So not only will it reproduce via the acorns, it will eventually start when it's left to its own devices out in a big field or in the woods, growing those branches to the ground to actually start new plants like a century plant. So live oaks are wonderful, fantastic. Again, almost like your southern magnolia. Nothing says the South like a live oak. You do need space for it though. You do need space. And you also got to consider live oaks. They live a long time, sure, in the woods or in an undisturbed area, but urban trees go under a lot of stresses. So, you know, sometimes we get real upset. This looks pretty good at this school or wherever it is, but if it started to decline, you know, the neighborhood, the community may be all up in arms. Oh my gosh, you know, but my grandfather went to school with that with that live oak there. It can't die. Everything has a lifespan, and you know, in a urban situation, it, you know, it has a shorter lifespan. So sometimes those things just happen, but you need a lot of space if you're going to have these beautiful live oaks. We have a community here that was probably like 30 years old now, and 25, 30 years ago, there's an ordinance that, you know, they had to put in majestic trees for the building that they were doing, except they put in these live oaks in these villas with very little space, and now it's a problem. And the live oaks have to come down. They're breaking up the sidewalks, you know, the foundations of the houses. So that all goes back to right plant, right place, right tree, right place. Here's a nice native tree that it's not showy. It's not, you know, a diva or a superstar, but it's going to be a very good performer for you. It's called a winged elm. I don't think I have a picture in this particular presentation that will show you. The branches have like little corks that come off of them, look kind of like wings, hence its name, winged elm. It's going to do much, much better than any of the Chinese elms, you know, because this is a native elm here. Doesn't get Dutch elm disease, just a good medium size tree, you know, to have on your property. I'm not going to discuss any particular, you know, in the interest of time, any particular palms. I just want to tell you about palms in general. Jim Davis of the Extension Office, he's the palm expert. I bet you he has some presentations on it. I'll see if I can find a recording, put it on my Facebook page. But the things I want you to remember about palms in general are, you know, not every palm is for every landscape. Be careful of cold tolerance. We're putting a lot of palms in our area that probably aren't 4.9A and might freeze at some point. You want to make sure there's growing room between them, the correct spacing. The terminal growing point is something you really need to think about. A palm is not a tree. A palm is more closely related to grass, believe it or not. And in the middle, it's called its growing point. It's spear leaf. If that dies, the palm is dead. There's no bringing it back. So, especially during storm season, you'll have someone come to your yard and say, hey, I think you need to let me hurricane prune your palms. First of all, I want to let you know that's not a thing. It's not necessary. What was here long before any of us were? Hurricanes and palms. In fact, you know, most palms, like the cabbage palms, are built to withstand the hurricanes. And you see in all the pictures how they kind of fold up like this. That's their way of dealing, with all the wind and everything. If you take away all their fronds and leave it with this, then the way it folds up, what is it doing? It's protecting that spear leaf. You're just leaving the spear leaf out for all the elements. So if you want to prune your palm, this is the acceptable way. This was before pruning. So at here, we'll call this 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. You can prune everything under it, nothing above it. Leave that mound. This is over pruning and very dangerous for your palms. Just a little thing there. Before we go, we're going to talk, since we're talking about trees, we're going to talk about invasive trees as well. Trees that you should not choose for your landscape. According to the Florida Exotic Plant Pest Council, it's Pest Plant Council, sorry. There's 2 categories. Category 1, there are invasive exotics that are altering native plant communities by displacing native species, changing community structures or ecological functions, or hybridizing with natives. Then there's also category 2, those invasive exotics that have increased in abundance or frequency, but haven't quite yet altered Florida's plant communities to the extent that category 1 has, but the FLEPC is what we call it, Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, I gotta turn that around, is a watchdog group. So they're watching these category 2s. They're saying, we're watching it. We're gonna see what you do. This here is over 100 years old, and it is a camphor tree. And the reason I showed this one is it's at Chinsegat Conservation Center in front of what used to be a home there. Not Chinsegat Hill, but the Conservation Center. It's in front of the hill because it used to be a status symbol. I have the money to send a wagon down to the port of Tampa to get an exotic, Asian tree and put it in my yard. Look how important I am. Well, they're not from this area. There's no checks and balances. And now we have, this invasive exotic tree that is no big status symbol really to have at all. Most invasive exotics by nature are fast growing. That makes them weak, makes them fall in a storm. We all know, as much as you may love your camphor tree, you can't tell me you don't see all the baby little camphors around there that you're having to mow. And then what don't you see? You don't see what the birds eat of those berries and take and redeposit somewhere in, some undeveloped lot far away from you. And that's what happens with a lot of invasive trees. Chinese tallow is another one, very common in Spring Hill. People planted it all over, but it tends to take over large areas, thrives in areas where the soil stays wet. Also found in upland, well-drained regions. Usually the things about these invasive trees is they're not picky. But, FLEPC, because it's category 1, has their eye on this Chinese tallow. Golden rain tree, in another month we're going to hear, because they're going to turn all these beautiful colors, this yellow and this salmon color, and it's going to look like fall colors. And they're beautiful. But this is actually category 2. There is no plant that I'm going to tell you isn't beautiful. Whether or not they're beautiful is not the point. It's whether or not they were supposed to be here. It wasn't their choice to be here. They didn't hop a ship and come over here. This is all human activity that caused all of this, and then they don't have their natural checks and balances, and it does harm our native ecosystem. So what I can tell people who are in love with their golden rain tree, but yet then in the spring we'll call the extension office all in a tizzy because they have millions of little red and black bugs all over their sidewalk or yard or anything. Those are called jadera bugs, and they're eating those golden rain tree seeds. So this one's pretty easy because I can use the bugs as a deterrent for people not to have the golden rain tree. China berry is another one. It's all over Spring Hill. You want to stay away from that one too. Most of these you're not going to be able to buy in a nursery. It's, probably illegal to do so. Some of them, not all of them. But, your neighbor may say, hey, here's a cutting, or here's one that was growing. Here, grow it on your own. You want to avoid that as well. Australian pine, I had that picture at the front of the invasive slide. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And this was an Arapica. There's this area of Arapica you can drive through, and you're going under them, and they look so beautiful. They also take over coastal areas, and a lot of animals have trouble. Sea turtles, horseshoe crabs, crocodiles. They all have trouble because the roots of this takes over the sand areas. It's very shallow rooted, and therefore they also fall very easily. But they form dense thickets. And here's my point here of how dense of a thicket these Australian pines can form. I took this picture in Arapica at a coastal cleanup. Let's play a game of who can see the master gardener. Can you see my friend here picking up trash on the floor under these Australian pines? Can you see her yet? That's how, how thick of a thicket these form. See, there's her arms, there's the bucket, and the hat that she was wearing. She's been over picking it up. That just proves, how thick they grow together. Brazilian pepper, that's on, our list that you cannot even have growing on your property. You have to remove it. I'm going quickly through this because I have other classes specifically on invasive trees that you can explore as well. The white lead tree, those are the Brazilian pepper and the white lead tree. If you have those on your property, which is most likely going to be on the coast, like in Hernando Beach, you will get a letter from Hernando County saying you must remove it from your property. Those are the only two where you're going to get letters like that. So to choose good trees, I'm always touting this book. This is a free book here. So you can go on Amazon or someplace and people are trying to sell you this book. Don't pay for this book. This is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Guide to Plant Selection and Landscape Design. There are so many ways to get a hold of it for free. You can email me and set up an appointment and come by here at Utilities and I'll give you one. You can go by the Extension office. There's their phone number, 352-754-4433, and arrange to get one. If you're getting to where you don't want to go in places, call Teresa, set an appointment. She'll come out to your car to give you one. You can go by the Hernando County Master Gardener Nursery at 194 Oliver Street in Brooksville on Wednesdays and Saturdays from 8 to 11. They have these books where you can get one for free and get some nice plants and talk to very knowledgeable people. You can go to just Google Florida Friendly Landscaping UF. Make sure you get, the trademarked University of Florida, correct website. Download it from there. There's also a web tool. It's not really an app, a web tool that you can put on your phone. That's cool to take to the nurseries. You can go to watermatters.org. That's the Southwest Florida Water Management District's website. Look around there for resources for residents. And there's a form there that you fill out and they will mail this to your house for free. So there's all these different ways. Just, don't fall for paying for one. And I have classes all the time. These are the upcoming classes. Next week, I'm going to have a co-host. Frank Galdo is Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Coordinator in Pasco County. If you've seen my other classes with him, he's a really smart dude and really interesting. And He's been brainstorming with me about this class, diverse lawn areas, how to break away from monotonous monocultures. So what I kind of had in mind was people who, live in non-deed restricted areas where you can have what we call a diverse lawn area or a freedom lawn full of different weeds, and how you can let that happen. What he has in mind is, people who live in more structured communities, how they can bring more diversity into their yards. So we're going to cover kind of both things, and I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And on September 8th, Dr. Lester, because he's the entomologist, is going to cover favorite plants. Him and I are going to cover favorite plants of Florida pest insects. Kind of a trick title there. You think, oh, favorite plants. This is favorite plants of Florida pest insects. So sometimes we have to learn, there are certain plants that insects go after. So what we need to do about that. I have rain barrel workshops every month. If you are interested in a rain barrel workshop, you must email me first. That's the first step to attending. You can't just put going on Facebook. You have to email me to get all of the information and to sign up. And at the end of the month, I have plain pollinators, just those ugly pollinators that everybody ignores. They're not the beautiful, queens, the beautiful monarchs, the beautiful, all of that, but they're still doing a great job out there. So that is what we are going to cover. And here again is my information. If you have any questions, please go ahead and email me at LillyB@hernandocounty.us. Here's also my phone number. And most of you are probably following my Facebook page, but do so if you're on Facebook. It will let you know about upcoming classes and other things. There, if you go and look now, there's 2 people whose yards I just certified as Florida friendly. Get a little peek of their yards. They're absolutely beautiful. And of course, you can find my playlist, which I have probably like 55 classes on there now, on Hernando County Government YouTube. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you have a terrific day.